Hey everybody, Scott Stevens here. With had the website weatherwars.info, but now working with Metadime and Media, Metadime Digital actually, and we're going to transfer some of this content over in that direction in the coming days and weeks. Certainly more likely days than weeks. But we're getting towards the end of the week, and there's been a topic we've been looking at for quite some time, and we're seeing the national media now get a hold or a grasp of how big this cold event is about to be for the eastern and northeastern part of the United States. And you'll see that play out over the weekend as that event draws closer and closer, with the cold air literally knocking on the Great Lakes door up into Canada, where their temperatures are awfully chilly at this point in time and not going to warm up. We've got about 8 of very, very chilly weather. And correspondingly, the heat is on out west. California, Arizona, southern Utah, parts of Nevada, central West Texas, New Mexico. It's just plain hot. And where I am in southern Colorado, despite the elevation, temperatures are a little bit above normal. Not too bad, but certainly above normal. So let's pop on over here. We'll start with on Facebook. This was a post I just threw up a little bit before we began the show, and I want to talk about trails because that honestly is what got me in hot water in the beginning. As I was talking about some of the things that are happening with aircraft and planes and weather modification, and why these two, in my eyes and from my scientific perspective and my experimentation, if you will, for what's happening with these trails. You'll see a contrail or a chemtrail, as they're commonly known in the community, take a shape. It's laid out by a cloud, but if we are laying a straight line of powders or condensation or water vapor into the atmosphere, you would think it would largely hold together. That portions of the sky are not that different from this end to this end. So, what is happening with the trail out here? What kind of force, energy, disturbance, vibration, particles, what has happened to the plane right or the trail right here? And this is after throwing up time lapse cameras and time lapsing the sky. This is what I noticed was happening, was that I was seeing trails begin to deform in very unusual ways. But what gave it away is that then another aircraft would come along and mark, in this particular instance, where this trail had bulged out towards the right, almost at its greatest extent. And so there seemed to be some other program where the aircraft early on in 2004, 2005, I wasn't sure whether we were dealing with commercial aircraft that were being intentionally flown into these little anomalies or these little perturbations where the trails begin and end. But as 15 years have passed, I'm like, okay, there's a reason why these pilots don't have to do much. Once they get the aircraft airborne, Honeywell Flight Systems take over, and then they just have to land the plane and be there in case of any emergency. That these aircraft are so, let's just say, computer driven, that there is an agenda with their flights and with their flight plans, that the pilots don't have to do a lot these days. So here's another example of a nice trail laid on through. This was a Southwest aircraft, I believe, and hitting the ends of these mountain wave clouds or these lenticulars. But this is out over the San Luis Valley, just a little west of where I am. You can see that there's absolutely a deformation happening right here. It's like the trail runs into something and snaps, and maybe even is smushed up, if that's a word, up against this resistance that's right there, and then drawn in this fashion into this particular wave cloud. So there's a little bit of a low pressure here, and the existence of this trail right through here will measure the draw towards it. So as I move through the years, it's like you need to have a real-time surveillance of what's going on in the sky, so you can feed that data back into massive computers or models, so you can understand what's happening with the weather. And that, how does that translate down to the ground? What's going on down here? Well, or what it absolutely does to some degree or another. So if you wanted to engineer an event, you would begin to work on it days, if not weeks ahead of time. All right, a little rundown of what's going on currently The cool air is in place out west. We are an hour, hour and a half after sunset in New England, mid-Atlantic states, where temperatures have cooled decidedly into the 40s and 50s. 30s are showing up into the upper peninsula of Michigan, over towards International Falls and Bemidji, if you will, and cooler, if not sub-freezing temperatures in place in northern Quebec and Alberta. So they're cooling off nicely, or not so nicely if you like spring weather. As the cold air begins to work its way out of Canada, we're beginning to see some snow. Let's pop in here into the Adirondacks as the winter mode. So some of the higher elevations of the mountains here, as the colder air pushes in, there's enough humidity, enough instability that a few thunder shower-like events are happening. But certainly the cold air has yet to arrive. We'll pop off to the west just a bit over here to Michigan, and we've got some snows beginning to come into place into Marquette. And they are honestly looking at a week of continuous cold weather into the Great Lakes states and in through eastern Canada. So it's going to be kind of a rough go for the folks up in there if they're all into the gardens and the backyard and just emerging from winter, and all of a sudden you're kind of smack back into the groundhog hole. Severe weather, no tornadoes, but we just can't rule out those kind of things this time of year, as these cells get rather large. We've got enough instability. Lifted indices are nice and low, so watching out just west of Wichita Falls. All right, little larger picture on the satellite imagery with the cool air beginning to emerge from the south, and then the thunderstorms erupting into Texas. Here's the showers into New England as the sunset terminator begins to work across the image, and then the high pressure as it begins to reassert itself in California. We'll take a little bit closer look here. Lots of trails. You can see them working on the lower Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, as those aircraft are leaving straight lines right perpendicular across the flow of the jet stream. And then they can begin to add whatever energy they need to in that situation to whatever their agenda is. And that's far from me to guess what their agenda is at this point in time. So the risk of severe weather in the yellow hashed area across the Sooner State, Oklahoma, and then fire weather possible from southern Colorado, where I am, throughout much of the state of New Mexico and into the western panhandle of Texas. Cool weather with mixed precipitation into the Great Lakes states will pop out through tomorrow, and that mixed threat of precip all the way into the higher elevations of eastern Tennessee, Chattanooga, up to they say Asheville, North Carolina, through almost all of West Virginia, and then into the Canadian Maritimes, with another reinforcing surge of cool air into the northern Rockies. So let's go to the National Weather Service and the Weather Prediction Center, the WPC, as it's known in the community. And they're highlighting Oklahoma today, as we saw, with that risk of severe weather. It's also, they're alerting to everyone to that it's Hurricane Preparedness Week. It's time to begin to be thinking about those storms, the Atlantic storms, or hurricane season for us here in the States. But the Pacific certainly isn't out of the question, as well, as we saw the models yesterday trying to spin up a storm towards Nicaragua and southern Mexico. But it is that time of year nonetheless. And then depending on whether we're El Nino or La Nina, which way we pop into that, and we'll look at that tomorrow, we'll have some say one way or another as to how intense this season may get. They're also now highlighting the polar air, and these would be the high temperatures for May 9th, for this coming Saturday, 2 days from now, with the heat out west, moderate in the middle of the nation, and then just downright cold for the first week of May as we move through the eastern part of the U.S. So the jet stream continues to sink into kind of condense itself and go through its circulation, drawing the cold air down from above, dropping it into New England and the eastern U.S. Meanwhile, we have these reinforcing ripples pouring out of Canada into the middle part of the U.S., and the western states continue to be protected from weather, though the rain is welcome and needed here. So in a way, it's protecting the drought situation that's taking place out west. And so it's going to take until beyond the next weekend until we can begin to break the cold out east and then flush it in with some moderate Pacific air. And then it's truly going to be amazing how rapidly it turns from cold to hot. and then the cool weather towards about 2 weeks from now begins to settle into the west. Just now, as we've turned warm and everything's bloomed out, we'll probably be looking for the risk of some frost in Idaho, northern elevations of Utah, Wyoming, and Montana. It's not unusual. It happens this time of year. So what I'm interested in looking at this is the blue areas. This is where the snow would fall. This would be noon tomorrow. So we could literally middle of the day in the Finger Lakes region of New York into northwestern Pennsylvania, the oil country, dealing with some of the snow, and that snow all the way down the spine of the Appalachians. And so we really could be looking at a bit of a northeaster. Not that they really had a whole lot of winter weather in the Northeast this past winter. That would be very unusual for it to wait until 8th, 9th, 10th of May for that to happen. And then there's just a whole lot of cold air on the heels behind it. So it's going to be probably a white weekend. Whether it'll stick on the ground or not, I'm not quite sure. And neither, nobody really is, but there's enough of it coming that we could see some of that on the ground. So another map that I haven't shown you yet is going to be the total precipitation that would come off out of these storms over the next week or so. So out 12 hours, you can see where my cursor is at the top of the screen, 24, 28 hours, 27, that's a day away. So literally in the next day, we're looking at the Dakotas, Montana, some showers in Mexico where they could begin to get into the monsoon season, and then light precip in here, a quarter, third of an inch. So that's 3-4 inches of, 2-3 inches of snow, because whatever comes out of the ground or out of the sky will likely be rather sloppy. But I want to scale this out for about a week, 168 hours. So where we're looking at some of the heavier precipitation would be southern Kansas, Oklahoma, and the panhandle of Texas. These are areas that have turned dry. They've turned very dry. So I'm going to go to the drought monitor where we had an update today. And this is eastern Colorado, southern Colorado, and it's still in northern California and Oregon where it has remained so dry. They'll get a little bit out here, and so will the high plains. So this is literally all welcome. And Florida as well. They're under the gun for some precip. I can go out a little farther. I can go out 2 some odd weeks, but we really begin to lose the accuracy once we pass about 250 hours or 10 days. It's just kind of it's a crapshoot at best. But if we'll run that all the way to the end, so West Texas into Oklahoma and then parts of Florida getting moisture as well as the West Coast. So all in all, the pattern change once we get rid of the cold back east looks like it's going to bode very well for some of those drier locations to get some water, some much needed water as we go into these dry seasons. Good to see everybody popping online there. There's Tracy, Vicky, Jody. I'm so glad to see you back in action. I've been following you since 2007. My first trip down the rabbit hole. Yeah, I haven't gotten out of that rabbit hole yet, Jody. I don't know that I ever will. There's just way too much going on down there to want to go, because there's so many things that connect to weather, whether it's economics, whether in this case, whether we're wondering if this virus continues to spread in a different climate system. We don't know. So we've got to kind of go through these things before we have answers. So here's some of the news that's up on Weather Underground. They're talking about the extreme May forecast, with the cold east, the hot out west, and then the early season heat will continue to spread from the southwest. And then mentioning once again, Florida's thirsty conditions, and then the beginning of hurricane season that the National Weather Service popped out today. And because Florida, the panhandles along that Gulf Coast from Brownsville, ringing the entirety of the Gulf Coast, has been so very dry that I-10 particularly has been closed because of the smoke. So that's kind of where we are for the day. And I'll come back on screen and we'll close this out. So I hope you can hear me a little better today. I had to put it on some headphones so I could get a little feedback on the audio. But hey, Mike, sky's a mess in Milwaukee. I bet it is. Ahead of these storms, they tend to hit things with chemtrails, so they can see and adjust the event as it arrives, so they can do their inputs, input their waves, or kill it with ionization. They've got a toolkit. It's not just HARP. It's not just Nextrad. And I'm still on the fence with Nextrad, although I'm being put in touch with someone who believes that's the main tool. And I tend to think we're looking at technologies that are far, far older than stationary rotating radar domes. They could have an impact. Every kind of resonance can be shaped and sculpted to one form or another, but you need to really have space-based tools. so you can access the entire planet. All right, that's it for a Thursday, and I'll see you tomorrow evening, and then maybe an update over the weekend, depending on how much snow. Because if we've got a good blizzard going on in the Northeast, hey, I'm all about it. All right, guys, have a good night. Keep looking up. See you tomorrow.